every woman on the show, every female character. We don't serve the men around us.
I remember when I heard that Rings of Power was going to be a thing, and understandably, a lot of people were excited, some people were not. One thing that really stuck out about Rings of Power was how big the budget was going to be. With a practically $1 billion budget, people were expecting something grandiose, something pompous, majestic, marvelous, and possibly a series that would even rival the movie. The creators said that they were going to draw on Tolkien's work, and what ended up happening was nothing short of a disaster.
Cliche is that the male character comes in and sweeps the woman off her feet, and that she's demure and she's, and this is the opposite of that. I love that she's an empowered woman.
Now, as I've said in my review videos about Lord of the Rings Season 1 or Rings of Power Season 1, I thought it was okay. I thought it was okay not knowing the lore myself. However, when people are branding something with a specific IP, they're specifically doing so to draw in fans of that IP already. It's a way to make money. Why take the risk creating something new when you can instantly make money on something that people love already, and you can just ride the never-ending story dog coattails of nostalgia? It's easy, and there's already source material there. So riddle me this: why on earth would they make something like this and completely ignore the source material? Because what I'm hearing from fans is that they completely bastardized the source material to the point that makes you wonder why they even bothered saying they were basing it off of that or using the IP in the first place. Apparently none of the characters act like the characters, and that's not the only issue. The budget, which was almost $1 billion, does not feel as though it was worth that much. So where did the money go? Maybe it went to marketing, because you can't turn your head in any direction or use the freaking bathroom in peace without an ad of Lord of the Rings Rings of Power showing up on your phone, on your walls, through your windows. It felt like one of those paranoid horror movies where someone is seeing something that nobody else can see, and it's constantly being advertised and following you everywhere you go. If they say most of their budget went to the marketing, then I can totally believe that. But then they forgot to make an actual never-ending story. Even though I did enjoy the Rings of Power in terms of something to watch that happened to be fantasy-based, and I got to see a monster or two in there, it was very forgettable, and I only remembered it when I saw people talking about it online.
My character, Marigold, is a Harfoot. Marigold is a matriarch. She is in charge of her family. She rules the roost.
What did stay in my mind, however, indelibly, was House of the Dragon, which is also an offshoot of an IP, basically a prequel to a major franchise called Game of Thrones, at least for the show universe. They were on around the same time, and House of the Dragon, which is also a show that people were very ambivalent about, did leagues better, with less than half the budget of the Rings of Power show. Now, what I found interesting and quite annoying is early on, when people were finally allowed to review, because the show was so insecure about how it would do that they forbade people from reviewing it until after a certain point. Anyone who expressed their displeasure at the show, which through the mouth of the fans came the accusations and the warranted displeasure that the show varies very greatly and strays away from the source material, which is something the creators promised they would be following closely, was considered a bigot or considered to be review bombing. You could not look up Rings of Power or look up a review without all the organizations falsely coming out and accusing the consumers and the viewer base that if they did not agree that the show was good and didn't just open their mouth and get deep-throated by daddy the way that you're supposed to and shut up, that you're a bigot and that you're review bombing the show. That I did not agree with. While my review was mediocre to okay, the show was fun, it was very forgettable. And this is for someone who does not know the source material.
Playing Isildur's sister, Eärien, Elendil's daughter. She's an aspiring architect and the baby of the family, yet kind of more of the adult in this relationship.
But for most of the fan base, people who wanted to see it do well, people who loved the Lord of the Rings movie, they absolutely despised it because it was something that, to them, had the name of Lord of the Rings, had the character names, but was just a completely different story. And almost a slap in the face to the original creator, Tolkien, the one who created the work that they were supposed to be basing the show off of. It's very strange to look back at videos and media and seeing the degradation of the relationship between consumer and the sellers or creators. The extreme disassociation between the critics and fans of a franchise became an ever-widening chasm, and in my mind's eye was akin to someone throwing fireballs at you, telling you to eat them, and when you hurl them back or spit them out, they point fingers at you to the rest of their mob and friends and say, "See, you're immoral because you would not swallow the hot coals I was trying to put in your mouth." It is the ultimate form of gaslighting, bordering on tyranny when it comes to the media world and consumption. Creativity will ultimately die if people, number one, are not allowed to be creative, i.e. strictly depending on old source material, rehashing and remaking, and expecting people to have that sense of novelty every time you reboot or remake something and change it. And two, if you vilify, condemn, and harshly and unfairly judge the people who you are depending on to make the money for you by buying your product simply because they are being honest about not liking your product. If I have my money and I feel like I don't want to give it to you because I don't feel like what you have produced or created is worth me paying for, it is utterly uncouth and very destructive of you to force me to like it. Do you know there's a word for something when you want someone to give you something and they say no and you gaslight them and try to force them into taking it? It happens a lot in jail, and it happens a lot to women and children. And that word is not allowed to be said on YouTube. Anyway, with all of that said, and that very weird history tailing Rings of Power, people were just about done with it. They already gave it a chance. And even just for giving it a chance and being honest about their opinion, unless of course they had something good to say about it. So who knew that hurling giraffe shit into the face of your consumers would chase them away? Many of the fans decided, I've had it up to here. I am not going to even bother. Many people just didn't watch anymore, and I can't blame them. I'm hearing about a season 2, and honestly, I am not excited. I don't hate the show to the degree that others who are actual fans of the franchise do, but I completely understand why they do. And there's something to be said for someone like me, who's a virgin to the franchise, who barely remembers the movies, to not even be interested in a season 2. While for House of the Dragon, I am very upset that we're going to have to wait very long, to the point where, to make myself feel better, I will have to watch over season 1 just to scratch the itch. Around early October of 2022, the Rings of Power showrunners Patrick McKay and J.D. Payne seem to finally admit, after kicking and screaming, that elements of the first season didn't work as planned. Right before the season finale on October 14th. Even then, there is still some kind of disconnect from what the fans are saying they did not like. Payne saying one of the biggest things we learned was even when it's a small scene, it always has to tie back into the larger stakes. There are things that didn't work as well in season 1 that might have worked in a smaller show. And while the pacing was an issue for season 1, that's not the biggest thing the fans were complaining about. The characters were very unlikable. The lore was consistently inconsistent. The costumes looked cheap. Dare I say also, one of my biggest peeves personally was the elven designs. The elves did not look like elves. They have to look fairer and more ethereal and breathtaking, and they have to stand apart from every other humanoid in the show. And that is something that I did remember from the movie. Even though elf people playing the elves weren't as attractive as an elf would be, in reality, at least you understood when you were looking at one. Meanwhile, most of the people playing elves look like they just woke up from a freaking hangover, barely brushed their hair, put some pointy ears on, and decided to go into work and say they were elves. And if the budget of the show had been much cheaper, maybe all of that could have been forgivable. But it wasn't. We're talking about $1 billion production that looked like people coming together at a convention on very beautiful sets that don't fit the characters in them and cosplaying as characters that they're supposed to be. With the irony being that they're not going out as much as cosplayers would to actually look as much like the characters as they can or how the characters were described. One of the creators said that it's a massive learning experience for everyone involved and the bar has to keep going up. And based on how the show did, there is no place for it to go but up. There's something to be said with fans giving their honest opinions about things they don't like, including what many agreed to be sloppy writing full of postmodernist pontificating. The fans can feel when something is not real. And while there has to be a healthy balance between creatives being free to create despite what the fans may want and the fans being pleased so you can get their money, what has certainly been agreed on for seemingly centuries is you do not insult the people you are depending on to pay pay you. The most powerful thing in a capitalist society is the dollar. The wonderful thing is you can reach high and become anything you want to be as long as you can convince people to pay you. And the way you do that is you dazzle them, is you seduce them. You make something that they cannot resist. What doesn't work is making something odious, tasteless, and boring, and then burn the bridge that you're going to need to cross later by calling them names and telling them that they are the problem with why your production failed. It is important for creators to remember that not everyone fits the same boat. There could be people disagreeing on something about a show that is completely different to the reason another person is disagreeing. Writing off bad reviews or bad ratings just solely on them being bad ratings and lumping everyone into the same bucket is generalizing, and it's very dehumanizing and demeaning. And these studios are ironically ignoring the marginalized voices they claim to stand up for by completely disregarding their issues laid out in their reviews that are also negative. The saying, "you catch more bees with honey than with vinegar," still stands today. And if people can no longer respect the uniqueness and autonomy of the people as a whole, creativity will ultimately die. Even if people were not as vocal about disliking something, they just would not spend their money on it. But even still, the studios and creators would still come out and call them the most heinous things, even after several of them would claim that if the consumers did not like their project, they could just choose not to watch. And after the consumers would have done so, the studios would turn on them and accuse them of being absolutely monstrous because they did not watch. And then where does that get us? Your show still fails, and society still ends up being boring because you have failed to contribute something valuable and indelible to society. Thanks so much for watching. This has been Ulturi. You ask, we answer.